Okay, we're live now. All right. So who would like to go first?
I could
I
start.
okay. You
Or
go first. You can
okay.
go.
All right. So, what I was looking up was information about how having a lack of peers affects children, and what I found was that peer interaction to be able to learn how to interact with peers as they get older. They could it could just be the people just being around them their age so they can learn how to talk, they learn how to communicate, whereas if they're just with adults the whole time, they're not always going to learn how to communicate with other people their age. And I also saw something that was interesting, that through the groups of peers that they are around at a young age, they'll tend to gravitate towards people with the same emotional standpoint and the same type of thing when they're older too. Like if they're younger and their friends are kids that are all quieter and shy, they're quieter and shy. Whereas if they're the one that's looked at as the leader in the group, they'll find other friends that they can be the leader in the group as they go on through middle school and high school and throughout all their life. So that was pretty cool that I saw, and
Mhm.
just how much that at a young age it just starts, and from there it keeps going.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
That's really cool.
that's
Um, so let's see. I'm pulling up the questions.
been,
So the other thing, what did you do for your the assignment last week, the physical or cognitive domain
and
interrupt?
then last week we looked at dyslexia, which we were trying to figure out how to help kids with dyslexia do better in school, and also with parents how they can help support it, because there's not a lot of support through schools, because they just look at a lot of kids are labeled just they're lazy because they don't like to read out loud, they don't like to interact when they're doing group assignments because they don't know how. And so we went and looked into how that can be solved and helped, and looked at as more of a learning disability than just a child being lazy.
Okay. Um, and then what's the last question? Um, oh yeah, so just talk about the like domain interviews that you did. Um,
And then
a
the
couple weeks ago.
yeah, the interviews I did, it was interesting. I interviewed my mom, who she's taught primary and has a degree in early childhood preschool ed. And so I interviewed her, and a lot of things that she pointed out. I also interviewed my boss. I work at a daycare, and interviewed her, and they said a lot of very similar things, which was interesting because one was doing the age group 2 to 5, one was doing age group 6 to 11, and it was kind of cool seeing how both things had the issues and the domains that at both ages it can affect, but it also affects differently. Like for one to go and say, okay, they can't socialize with, they don't have peers at age 2 to 5, it affects them differently than not having friends at ages 6 to 11. And so that was neat to hear both of them say it for two different age groups, and the how similar it was, but also how different it could be.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to share?
I think that's it.
Okay. I can go next. Okay. So, sorry, I'm going to be kind of reading from notes here. But, okay, so for the first question, the assignment last week, I did the cognitive domain with language speech delays in 2 to 5 year olds. Um, and the audience that we did for it was parents. Um, and the reason for that was, for the most part, parents are the most motivated to help their child. Um, and typically they spend the most time with them as well. Um, and so the intervention that we did was parents working directly with their child, and then some of the things they could do is reading with them, correcting vocabulary mistakes, um, and being an example of pronouncing things right, um, requiring a vocal response. Like when a toddler, for example, who is... Oh, did she just leave?
I think so. Maybe she lost connection or something.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, well, maybe she'll come back. Um, with requiring a vocal response, like with, say, a 3-year-old, they get upset and they start crying, and they do have a grasp on words and they can explain themselves somewhat. And so you ask them to, like, talk and explain what's wrong as opposed to just crying. That will help their language. And then the last thing was exposing the child to others. If they have siblings, like, that's really great, because, especially older siblings, because they can see them being an example of how to talk correctly. Hey, did you lose connection or something?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. So,
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's fine. Glad you're back. And yeah, so anyway, that was the assignment from last week. The thing I researched for this was bullying, and so I found a couple different articles. Some were like scholarly, and some were from more like parenting websites. But so one of the articles, it was called Peer Support as an Intervention to Counteract School Bullying. And so the intervention it focused on was how peers can prevent and intervene with bullying. A statistic I found was that 30% of school-age children are involved in bullying. And so, that's way too high of an amount. But so some of the things the article talked about was the difference between children who are bullied and are able to escape that versus children who are bullied and just always are the victim and never can get away from it, is that the ones who escape have peer support. They usually tell someone, and lots of times they try to become friends with the bully, and that's usually pretty effective. But with children who are bullied, they usually have lower attendance in school, and so that just kind of creates a vicious cycle because they need to be in school to make friends and have peer support, but they're not in school because of the bullying. It's a problem. And it also said that emotional regulation is really important for overcoming bullying. and that there are different kinds of peer support. There's befriending, peer mediation, and active listening, and it talked about how peers can actually be like formally trained to help friends with bullying. So some of the like main interventions that I came up with based on the articles was peer support, having proactive teachers and faculty at schools, counseling, not only for the victims but also counseling for bullies, having school assemblies so that like the entire population of the school is all together to hear about the problems of bullying and how to stop it, and then having like formal training for teachers and caregivers about bullying, so that they know like what constitutes as bullying, what they can do about it, that kind of thing. Yeah, and then for the last question, so for my interviews, I talked to 2 parents, and they both have children in the 2 to 5 range, and they talked about, for like the physical domain, they talked about a lot of things with safety, like home, being safe at home, like going outside, like crossing the street, things like that, being safe there, being like aggressive. And for cognitive, they talked about language delays, malnutrition, problems with like reasoning, and then for social emotional, bullying, sharing, that was a big one, especially for 2 to 5. So yeah. Who wants to go next?
I can go. I'll go next.
Okay.
So for the first question, last week my partner and I worked on malnutrition, and we discussed, you know, how it doesn't matter if you're too skinny or if you're overweight, you could still have malnutrition, even if you're eating or not. And we kind of targeted parents. I feel like we didn't specify specifically, but that's kind of where we were aiming towards, because they're around the kids most, and they tend to feed kids. Even if they go to school, they can send a full lunch with them or something. So they have control over what the child eats for the most part. And the intervention we came up with, I actually found it in an article, and it's the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence. And essentially what they do is they have them meet with a healthcare physician, and they just, you know, they talk with them about their current diet and what they need and how much malnutrition they currently have and how they can bring them back up to the nutrition which they need. And when they do this, they really try to involve the patient and a support group, such as a caregiver, you know, someone that would also be very involved in their lives and that can help them make healthy choices when they're eating. And so I thought that was really neat that they kind of really incorporate the patient themselves in making those decisions, so that they agree to that and they're okay and comfortable with the new lifestyle that they're about to begin. So just either having a low income support group, because either of those can conflict with providing enough nutrition for a child, or being able to have the means to get it, and or changing the lifestyle. For the second one, for this week's,
I had a question real quick.
Yeah.
So for the malnutrition, did you do it as a physical or cognitive intervention?
We did it as a physical.
Physical? Okay. Awesome.
Partly because it does affect, you know, it does affect the cognitive side, and it does affect their ability to focus in school, and their ability to develop physically. And so we kind of aimed at the physical development right there. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay. For this week's, I chose to do the amount of screen time children have, because I feel like that can be a huge dilemma for kids, even from 2 years old up to 11, that they get gobs and gobs of all the screen time, and parents sometimes have problems limiting that, especially when they're constantly asking for it. And I was really surprised because I found an article that actually said that a 4-year-old had to go to therapy because she was addicted to the iPad. And it just kind of explained how much she wanted to play on it and how often she wanted to play on it, and how she had behavioral misfits because she didn't get to play on it, or if it was taken. And actually the therapist said, well, she's not the only one her age I'm treating right now. So it's actually becoming a huge dilemma for kids as young as 4. So, and the interventions I've seen for that, there was more or less, there's a therapy side when it's pretty severe, but it was more of just the parental guidance and balancing the technology with other activities. And most of them just gave examples of how to encourage other activities other than playing on, the iPad or other technology that they might be able to have their hands on. So that was the biggest intervention, was mostly parenting, getting involved in disciplining their kids and getting them to do other things. So, and then for my interviews, I really enjoyed my interviews because I interviewed my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, and she has 2 kids, and she got to talk a little bit about some of the difficulties that they had with their oldest daughter and getting her to eat. Sometimes she just doesn't like eating. And so she kind of faced a little bit of malnutrition because it became such a power struggle to get her to eat sometimes. And then just talking about her social habits and how she's a little bit prone to talking to people even though she doesn't know them, and how that can be a problem with stranger danger and things like that. And then I also interviewed a gal I used to work with. She's a special ed teacher, and so I got to discuss with her a little bit more of the mental disability and physical disability. She didn't focus too much on that, but she just talked about, kids solve, and some of them don't know how to use coping mechanisms, and just, as Jessica stated about the dyslexia, a lot of people can misdiagnose that as for laziness rather than actually not understanding the work. And I've been in those shoes before, so I completely understand that. And so those were basically my interviews, and they were really, really interesting and a lot of fun to do. So.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. So for the first question, what I did last week, my partner and I made an educational pamphlet kind of directed towards parents about obesity in children. So with our pamphlet, we just kind of did different causes that we found that can lead to obesity in children. A lot of it was just lack of physical activity. It could be hereditary, and a lot of it was also based on their diet. And so then we listed some solutions that the parents could try to do with their children, and it was all about kind of how the parents are the biggest examples and have the most impact on the children's choices through that. And then we also listed some risks that children with obesity are more likely to have, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol. They're more likely to have early heart disease and bone problems and things like that. So it was mostly just educating parents on kind of how their kid might not be the only one, and this is what you can do to help your child, kind of thing. So that was kind of interesting to learn about. So for this week, for the social emotional, I chose disabilities like autism that can have an impact on social. things like that. So I found some cool websites that kind of listed some things that parents and teachers can do to sort of help with that, because there's, I mean, with a disability, there's nothing that you can really totally, completely get rid of. But certain interventions or like certain medications have been proven to help with just behaviors and things like that that can allow them to be more socially accepted and stuff like that. Something interesting that I found was that there's like a lot of programs that help with lower order disabilities, like more functioning, but not as many programs for those children with higher order. So I thought that was interesting because I would think, I guess it would be easier to deal with lower order, but because with higher order, I would think we'd need more, and there's not enough programs out there for that. And another thing that I hadn't heard of was this LOVAS treatment. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's like an institute for children with autism, and they focus on like getting them at a young age and finding out, if they have autism and things like that. And then since they're there at a young age, they use it's called Principles of Applied Behavior Analysis. Is like what they use. They help kids like with their education and also social interactions, and it's very individualized, like for each child. And it also has been proven to possibly achieve normal education levels by age 7. So I thought that was really interesting. That was like the most beneficial intervention, I think. And it was also like really focused on having the parents be like a big part of that with their children. So those are things that I learned about. What was the last? Oh, my interviews. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I interviewed a parent from my home ward who actually helped. I nannied their children. They have 3. One is actually autistic. So that was really interesting for me, and just to be able to like learn more while I was working with them, but also through the interview be able to kind of gain more insight into like her perspective on like she compared just the development of her child with autism compared to her other 2, and how it affects like the whole family, and also like their not only like their cognitive development, but also like their social development, just because like they have to be more aware of like their brother and certain things like that. And then I also interviewed a child care provider that I know from home too, and both of those are like the ages 2 to 5. So it was just really interesting to see like a lot of the things that came up were very similar between the 2. A lot of like the media thing that we talked about, how it can affect like this that we're talking about today, and then cognitive development and physical things like that. So yeah. You guys have any questions?
No. Yeah, that sounds good. So we have some like last follow-up questions to do. But does anyone have anything else they want to share? Okay. Okay, so yeah, the last thing, it says attempt to identify common elements of effective interventions targeted to different problems in different domains. From like what we've all said. I think one thing I've noticed is we've had one thing we've kind of all had in common with our interventions is focusing on parents. Because, they're with their child, usually they're with their child the most, and usually they're the best equipped to help them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys did the reading or not, but I liked the Neighbors and Neurons section and how it kind of covered how effective interventions be at a very young age for children. But then how, depending on the intervention and the culture of which the child is and stuff, and how that can influence, can make it better or worse for the child depending on the intervention. But I think that it's very interesting about how beneficial it can be at such a young age for those interventions to take place for a child.
Yeah, definitely.
And I also think supporting the child and recognizing what you can help with that for that child. In the article I read, it had a part that it said, like, just because the child's shy doesn't mean that they don't have, they don't need peer interaction. That it's stuff like that that teachers and parents can go and step in and help to monitor and help to guide the child, because the child isn't going to pick up the phone and call their friend on their own. It will be a parent that goes and says, hey, let's do play group at the park, and then it will get the children to interact with each other, and I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think along with like the parents being the biggest thing in common to us is like also the parent interaction with the teachers. Like having them be supportive together, I guess, is important.
Yeah. I agree.
Having a bigger support group than just parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the next thing is conclude by sharing your best general insight or suggestion about effectively intervening to foster optimum development.
I think one of the first things that you can do is have the right diagnosis for the child, because it really hinders them when you have a misdiagnosis for a child. Just like we talked about before, you know, misdiagnosing a child with dyslexia with just laziness, you know, that can be a huge hindrance to them, because then they, you know, there's just not that connection where they are smart, they can get it, but they're not getting it because the teacher or the parent doesn't understand why they're not getting it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and going along with misdiagnosis, I saw something the other day on one of the discussion boards. Someone put for a risk misdiagnosis, but like being diagnosed with something like autism or dyslexia or something like that when they don't have it, which I think can also really be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, that child goes through life assuming they have that problem, and, you know, it can mess things up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's really important for parents just to be involved in their child's life. And if they are, then I think they'll be able to notice if there's something wrong. Because usually parents are the first ones to notice something and then, you know, take them to a professional to get diagnosed. So it's really important that parents are just aware of everything going on with their child, you know, from infancy.
Yeah.
And also
Sorry.
Also, I think it's okay. I'm thinking it, like, I've seen a couple parents that they refuse to admit that their child is behind, that their child might need extra help. There's a kid that goes to our daycare who, he's 2 years old and he can't say any words. He just still, like, just baby talks. And the mom's like, oh, the doctor wants me to get him started in speech therapy, but I don't want to because my child's fine. It's like, okay, no, he's not. He can't say cup, he can't say ball, he can't say anything, there's gonna need to have some sort of intervention there, and for parents to not accept that causes an issue with the children to be able to grow and learn and develop, because they're not getting the support that if they have a disability and the parents don't want to admit it, then they're gonna feel like they're a horrible person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it really does vary with parents because sometimes they do get like really defensive
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to admit that something's wrong. Yeah, I'm not sure why.
To go along with that, just I think also that parents should be aware of some of the signs of bigger problems, like signs of autism or signs of speech delay or whatever, because if parents aren't aware of those things, they're like, oh, well, this is normal, especially with their first child. They just might assume that that might be normal when it's not. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think a good guide for that is for parents to be aware of the developmental milestones, like the checklist of that, because you know it covers all the domains for. I'm not sure how high up it goes age-wise, but like it's pretty detailed and you know, but it's also like in a checklist form, you know, so they can see how their child's doing based on that.
that's really cool. That's really neat.
And then with that, I was kind of thinking it could also have like that's why it's important for the kids to be around their peers, because then the parents can see, oh, these kids are talking, or at age 5 this kid is saying their ABCs, but my child isn't. Okay, what can I do to help?
Yeah. Definitely. And siblings can be good with that too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like if there are older siblings who are on track developmentally, the parents can kind of compare to see how if their younger child is how they are compared to the other one, if they're behind or not. Well, we still have 20 minutes actually. Oh.
Well, I had something that was kind of picking on my brain. I wanted to include it in the risks for this week, but I didn't know what to put for the categories. And one of them was, you know, since there is possibly going to be a lot more homosexual marriages in the future, one of my concerns is that one of their children will interact with my children the way they see their parents interact. And I'm, you know, at such a young age for kids as kindergartners or, you know, however old, how do you teach them, you know, the difference of like, this is wrong and you shouldn't do it, and, you know, just stuff like that, because the child that might be doing it to them won't understand that that's not okay with some parents or some children, you know?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that with, you know, all the risks that there are for children with homosexual marriage. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, because it's definitely common for opposite gender children to do that. And you know, sometimes that can go too far as well, but you know, usually it's just little things like, you know, flirting and that when they're really young. But yeah, I guess, I mean, if children have homosexual parents, it makes sense that they would do that because that's what they see their parents do, and you know, like with modeling and like imitation, the children would probably naturally do that without realizing that it's different from what other children experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for like teaching your own children, like as they're getting ready to go to school or whatever, and just make sure they know what their standards are.
Yeah.
Because I know for me as a kid, kid, I knew that I couldn't watch PG-13 movies at age 5, so I was able to say, no, I don't want to watch that movie. So for just about anything, it's amazing to see what kids actually do pick up and understand from what's being taught in the home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. But at the same time, it's kind of scary. Like, you know, at age 5, they're going off to school, age 5, 6-ish, and like you don't know just how much they are going to grasp, and like how much is too much to share when it comes to like more sexual things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was talking with a mom last night, and she was telling me about some of the things that they're going to start teaching in public schools and at what ages and stuff. And we're going, you know, it really depends on how you teach the child, of course, but I think, you know, if you teach some children these things too soon or in the wrong way, they want to try it. You know, they want to experiment on it, and that's where we get in trouble with educating children too soon. And sometimes you get in trouble anyways if you don't educate them, but
Yeah.
it just amazed me at how they want to teach them and at what ages of teaching them in that way. So
Yeah, I agree. I've been reading about that too. It's pretty crazy. I mean, it's varying like state to state, but yeah, some states are starting programs where they're teaching like full-on sex ed in kindergarten.
yes, exactly. And I can't help but want to lean more towards private schools as opposed to public schools.
Yeah,
You know.
or like even homeschooling. I mean, it's
Oh
just
yeah.
like that's definitely an option and a good option. It's just, you know, a lot of work,
Mhm.
especially for the parents to do
Oh
that.
yeah.
But yeah, and with these programs, most of them are absolutely mandatory, and
Oh yeah.
parents can't even
Parents
take
don't
their
have a
choice
say in
now.
them.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to get to the point where children who are in public school, like, you know, with LDS families, they'll teach, you know, what's right at home, and they may just have to say, like, yeah, you can't trust everything you hear at school, even from teachers. And that's a sad thing to have
Yeah.
to say to children, you know, because then it's like, well, what is it that my teacher says, like, what is true and what's not, you know? You're supposed to be able to trust what teachers teach you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it will get hard for the kids, like, in all aspects through the social and cognitive and physical. It's like when you're teaching them, you might not be able to trust you, and it's going against our beliefs. It's going to be really difficult for them to want to listen to their teacher teaching them that 2 + 2 is 4, or
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I feel like once children are older, more like middle school, high school age, they can understand that their teachers might have different beliefs than them and that that's why they teach things that aren't right. But, you know, when they're really little, it's hard for them to understand that other people think differently than they do.
Yeah. I remember thinking that when I was little that everybody wore garments as underwear, you know, because
Uh-huh.
that's just the way I grew up. I was like, well, of course that's what they wear to bed, or you know, just like that's what they wear under clothes. That's what my parents wear.
Yeah,
That's not the case. So,
yeah. Well, I guess maybe Lauren lost connection.
did you guys find anything else in the discussion board interesting?
Which one?
Any of them?
The with the like domain interviews?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, let me pull that up. Yeah, I've found a lot of interesting stuff. Um, oh yeah, that so last week for the cognitive one, someone, I don't remember who it was, they talked to like a professional child care provider, and or maybe it was a doctor, I don't remember. It was some kind of professional. Um, and one of the main risks they were talking about was ADHD and ADD, and how like that is becoming more and more of a problem, and it's increasing a lot in children. And I I have kind of like a torn opinion when it comes to those things because the rate of children who have ADHD like definitely is increasing. You know, from 10, 20 years ago, like that's clear. But I've read articles by even like by doctors about how they think a lot of children are getting misdiagnosed with ADHD when they don't actually have it. And I read a really interesting article the other day about how in France they don't diagnose ADHD the same way we do here. In France, they think of it as a social problem, and so they address it in a social, emotional way. Whereas here in the United States, we think of it as a cognitive problem, and so like we give medication and things like that. And the amount of children who have that in France is a lot less because they address it differently. Anyway, so it's interesting. Like, and I mean, there's some articles I've even read where doctors claim that they don't think ADHD like even exists, and that it's So you know, yeah, that just made me think a lot. I'm not sure.
That I can see how you're torn.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're talking about with the interventions, like what intervention is working best with kids, and then I think a lot of it, like personally, I think so many kids, you know, they're on their parents' tablets or they're playing games or they're doing all this and that with a computer screen, and then we expect them to sit in a classroom for 7 hours a day and just, you know, sit there and do work, and I can't blame them for wanting to be more stimulated. You know, I can tell when if I'm on my computer and I'm watching TV, I'm overstimulating myself to the point where I constantly have to have something going on all the time, and when I don't need that, you know. And I think that when kids are overstimulated, they just fidget and they can't hold still, and then they're like, well, that's ADHD, you know, that's ADD, they can't pay attention. And it's like, well, no, they can't, because they've been so stimulated. We've practically trained them not to be, you know, paying attention in school the way that they act outside of school. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, another thing that I've thought about is how I think just the educational system, especially elementary school, is kind of a big part of where the problem's coming from with this. Because like you said, they expect children, you know, even in kindergarten, to sit still for hours. And, you know, recesses are being cut a lot. That's becoming like a big problem. And so, you know, it's just, I'm not sure like how much that's changed, you know, since we were in elementary school. I think it's changed a bit. But yeah, with like higher educational goals and requirements, like it means taking out recess and expecting children to sit and be ready for like taking standardized tests and stuff. And yeah, like developmentally, they can't sit for hours. And they add technology into that, and it's just a mess.
They need that break, and they need time to be active, and it's taking away so much because they're going to school between, like, here, my siblings start school at 8:40. They aren't getting home till 4. By the time they're home, it's getting dark. So they eat, do homework.
That's a long school day.
That is very long.
And kids get out of school around like 3:40, but they walk home and walk to school so they don't get home
Oh.
till 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then they go and they say, yeah, we only have 10 minutes for recess. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and then the teachers are like, you need to stop talking during lunch. You're talking too loud. You need to, they come home and I'm just like, it's crazy because they're like, you aren't giving the
Yeah.
child a chance to learn how to socialize, to learn how to be active, to learn how to work together, because everything is guided and it has to be specific. And like
Yeah.
I've heard teachers that go and say, "Oh, you're not coloring in the lines, so you miss points." Or it's like, let them color
Oh my
out
goodness.
lines and
Yeah. That is so sad. I think, I feel like teachers in general just need a better understanding of child development. Like, just the most basic understanding of it could help a lot. And also, not only teachers, but like the people who, like the government and stuff who put programs into place.
Mhm.
Because if they understood child development more, they'd realize that like by taking away recess, like, and time to be outside and run around and stuff, like that is the intervention these children need to not have problems like ADHD. So they're like taking away the most basic intervention just because they don't understand it. And there's so much pressure for children to like perform so well.
Yeah, like we had friends who, because they only go to PE like once a week, which is sad. I feel like they should do more than
Yeah.
once a week. But
Wow.
we had friends who, she said that because her son would fidget in class or would talk in class a little bit, they'd go and take away PE or recess. They're like, if you're gonna be moving around in here, you can't do it outside. But that just progressed and added to the issue. It's like, yes, have him sit in the chair and have him sit in a classroom, but then when he's outside, don't take away the outside time.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's so weird to take away like recess, to make that a punishment when that's what would help them.
Yeah. I'm currently in the nursery right now, and some days you get a minute lesson in, and some days you get like a 15-second lesson in because their attention span is so short and they're just so fidgety. And sometimes I'm like, all right, let's get up. We're going to wiggle around. We're going to get all our wiggles out, and then we can sit back down and we'll have the lesson. And it goes so much better sometimes. Like, to me, I'm going, if a kid's fidgeting in his seat, he needs to get up and do 10 jumping jacks and sit back down. So, give them a little bit of physical exercise. And like, if they're fidgeting, there's a reason for it. It's because they need to move. So,
Because then it's just going to progress till they start poking at their neighbor, they start hitting, they start like throwing a fit because they want to do something else.
and their bodies need to at such a young age. I mean, that's how our bones get strong, is by using them. Our bodies become stronger by using them and running around and jumping and everything, And we don't become strong when we don't do that. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That was a nice discussion. We're pretty much we just have a couple minutes left to being done. So do you guys want to just move on to the last question, or was there anything else you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. So it says in the final 2 minutes. Oh, by the way, I did send another invitation to Lauren, so hopefully she can get back in. Anyway, okay, it says in the final 2 minutes, have a group member summarize the highlights from the conversation, include what has been learned and the conclusions drawn. So, you want just one person to do it, or you want all of us to say stuff?
I think it says one person to do it, but I really don't mind contributing. So.
Okay. Do you want to start?
Sure. Basically, I don't know how to summarize this.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot. There is a lot. Um, from Jessica, I got, the peer interactions are very important, and how dyslexia can be misdiagnosed and how that can hinder children cognitively and socially, and especially in their futures. Um, and then, I think it was you talked about speech delays and how that can hinder, social and cognitive in schools, and communication can, it can become problematic with communication in schools and with parents and peers. And I think you also brought up bullying. And oh wait, who brought up bullying? You did, right?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah. You brought up bullying, and how I thought it was really interesting how you brought up interventions for both the victim and the bully. With the school counseling and the proactive teachers and the parents knowing how to intervene and help both children progress and have better behaviors in those situations, and problem solving, as well as having better behaviors as far as if you're the bully. Home safety, which I considered that, and that was and I think, Lauren mentioned obesity and how parents can be involved and teachers can be involved, and how that awareness can just bring about better lifestyles for children and for parents. And she brought up autism, and how people can use medications, but they can also have programs to help children, learn how they learn and get better assistance in learning, and also with socializing with others. And I really like that there's programs to do both for kids and how individualized they are. And I covered malnutrition and the and how that can influence children develop or in their physical domain, and also with with screen time, and how much children shouldn't have screen time, and how it can deteriorate them from participating in school and with their schoolmates, and being involved. If the punishment for not paying attention in school is no recess, then they're obviously not socializing very much if they're not getting to talk in class or be at recess. So there's a little summary from me.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks. Yeah, I can just, like with what we talked about after we all shared, we talked about how children with homosexual parents might be affected, and how they might affect other children. And, like acting inappropriately with other children of the same gender because that's what they see their parents do, and they're just imitating that. And kind of an intervention we thought of with that was from, a very young age, even before children start going to school, having parents discuss those kind of things, and teaching them, like, what is right and wrong with that. And also, like, we talked about the sex ed programs in schools, like in elementary school, and parents might just need to teach their children that not everything that they're going to be taught in school is right, and make sure at home you're teaching them what is right, so that when they hear something that goes against that, they can understand that it's different, and maybe the spirit can help them to know that just doesn't sound right. And then we talked about like ADHD and recess and that kind of stuff. How ADHD is increasing, because physical activity is being cut from schools.
Mm-hmm.
and that like that's really the intervention children need is being active, and so schools are kind of doing the opposite of that.
Great.
Yeah. Well, I feel bad Lauren missed the last part, but she was here for most of it.
She was here for the most part, and that was good.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, I think that's good. I can stop the broadcast now.
Okay.